4 years ago at the Focusrite conference in the United States, I invited this guy named Brian Chesky to deliver a keynote. The room didn't quite fill up. A lot of people were wondering what he was talking about, and the buzz was palpable after his talk. Brian, of course, is one of the co-founders and CEO of Airbnb, and the growth since then is just absolutely phenomenal. I'm very pleased to introduce our next keynote speaker. Please welcome Mark Levy, the head of employee experience at Airbnb.
Thanks a lot. Good afternoon. I think I'm the only thing between you and your lunch, so hopefully we'll make the best of that. So as Philip said, I'm the head of employee experience at Airbnb, and for us, employee experience is a traditional HR function and then some. And we look at the entire employee journey from the moment someone's interested in coming to work for us all the way through alumni, because we really try to create a family experience at Airbnb, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that today. Let me start the slides here. Oops. So I've spent about 3 years in Europe living and working in France, and much of my time when we had holiday was down here in Italy, so I'm really happy to be here. I also was a travel agent when I was in university, and my first job after graduate school was with a small hotel company. So for me, it's great to be at this event and to be actually working with a travel company that's really disrupting travel. And after hearing your last speaker, an exciting opportunity for us to move from homes to trips and experiences and really help people to feel like they can live in the country or the city where they're traveling. So I want to start by talking a little bit about why I believe Airbnb has been able to evolve into this disruptor and why we've also been acknowledged as a great place to work. And it really starts with our mission and our values. So I'm going to start with this short video. So this idea of belonging anywhere, actually about 2.5 years ago, it started with this notion of wanting to have people feel like they can feel like they're home anywhere. And what we realized was it's more than the home. It's really more about the host. And then we realized it's more about the place, as in where you sleep, and it's much more about the city which you're exploring, which is how we decided to move from this idea of homes to trips. The idea around belonging anywhere as well is this notion of personal connection. And as your prior speaker talked about, we want people to go someplace and not do the typical 10 things. We want them to feel like that they live there. And so our mission around creating a world where you can belong anywhere starts in that broad sense and then comes much more together relative to how we interact, our employees with each other, and then our employees with our hosts and our guests. So our feeling is, in order for us to feel like we can belong anywhere, it has to start inside of Airbnb. And so a lot of what my team does is figure out how do we create this idea of belonging inside of Airbnb. And then once we feel like we understand what belonging is, then how do we help our hosts and guests to get there? And it's essentially this notion of an inside-out strategy. So it's around our company, our people, and our culture, and we belong here, and then therefore we can figure out how do we help outside of the company, our hosts and our guests to feel like they belong to part of this community of Airbnb, but how do they also create belonging in their homes and now as they explore the idea of trips? So about 2 years ago, we realized that this, as Phil mentioned, the idea of Airbnb was still quite foreign, and we really needed to figure out how do we leverage those people who know and love us best, and how do we move everyone up the commitment curve? So we started with our employees, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about how we started to treat our employees like we said we want to treat them like partners, and they told us they wanted to be treated like founders. And Brian said, well, there's 3 of us, and at the time there was about 600 employees, and he said, there's things that I tell Joe and Nate that I certainly can't tell you, but unless it's personal, private, confidential, I understand what you're asking for, and so we became much more of a transparent organization. The next thing we did was say, how do we use our employee practices to figure out how to bring our hosts even closer? And so while our hosts are independent entrepreneurs, micro-entrepreneurs, and they're running their own business, we wanted them to feel like they were part of this community, and we also wanted to figure out how we could help them through that journey of becoming a host and being a superhost. So we started to talk about how do we look at host acquisition the same way we look at sourcing our employees. How do we look at onboarding our hosts in a way that really helps them be set up for success as we do with our employees? How do we find the right milestones in order to recognize and reward our hosts? So your first visit, your 10th visit, your first 5-star review, your 100th 5-star review. And then we created this idea of superhosts, which is an extended level of the folks that have 5-star reviews, multiple stays, they get back to their guests within a certain amount of time, and they don't cancel on their guests. And so we also had to apply how are we going to deal with performance issues that we have with our hosts, because quality is an important thing in order to keep our brand up. So we've had to figure out how do we apply what we would do with an employee who's not performing with hosts. And so there are times when we have to take hosts off the platform, either because they're home or the way in which they're hosting isn't to our standards. So this was an interesting idea. It shows how we move inside and outside, how we share between our employees and our hosts, the different ways in which we're learning. So I talked about our mission, and now I want to talk about our core values. And the values are something that Joe, Brian, and Nate defined before they hired their first employee, and it's still something that we hold very true every day that we're at the office or around the world. And it's not something you would see on the walls like you do in many companies. It's really in our hearts, and it's how we work with each other. And here you see a picture at our last employee event where Unji, who's in Korea, is winning an award for being a serial entrepreneur, and I'll explain to you our values in a minute. Behind them, Brian, Nate, and Joe, in a rare moment where they're in a suit. We actually have, on Fridays, a lot of companies have casual Friday. We actually have formal Friday every once in a while, and everyone comes to work in a suit. The way we define culture at Airbnb is it's really the way people treat each other and work together, and it's our shared beliefs. So our 6 values, and to be honest, we're actually reevaluating them because we really want to make sure that the values are core to us. And there's a couple that I'll mention that are really more either aspirational or accidental. But the first one, and I think the one that's most at our heart, is around being a host. And by that we mean being a host, And we encourage all of our employees to host in their homes if they can. And now we're excited that employees can actually host an experience or be a city host now that we've expanded beyond the home. It also is about how we treat each other as coworkers, how we treat the guests that come to our offices, how do we treat our hosts and our guests. And it's really, it's a mindset and it's a way of behaving with each other. And it's interesting because a lot of our employees are in their 30s, and I hear a lot of CEOs in Silicon Valley talking about how when they hire millennials, they have to treat them how to behave, just normal manners. Everyone's in their phone, and people don't know how to open the door and do things for each other. For us, it's very much ingrained in the people who we hire because of this value of be a host. The second one is champion the mission. So you heard about our mission. It is why we get up and come to work every day. It's why we have a very low turnover rate. And it's why I think we've been successful, because everyone we hire truly believes in this mission of creating belonging. The third one is every frame matters. So 2 of our 3 founders are Rhode Island School of Design graduates, so they're designers at heart. And they fell in love with the Disney animation frames. And so everything we do, we try to think about what's the story we're trying to tell, and how do we pay attention to the detail in every one of those frames. And so that is how we look at our go-to-market process, our host journey, our employee journey, and that's a very aspirational value of ours. Be a serial entrepreneur is a great story. When Brian and Joe were struggling and people didn't understand what sharing a home meant, they went to the Democratic National Convention 8+ years ago, and they took cereal boxes and they designed an Obama O's and a McCain Crunch, figuring they'd apply to everybody. And they sold them for $10 a box. They made $30,000, and that's how they kept the company afloat for a period of time. And so serial entrepreneur for us is this idea of treating everything you do and the way you spend the money and the way you think about what you do in an entrepreneurial mindset as if it was your own company. And it's a value that's very near and dear to us. So even though our valuation is quoted as very high, our budgets are quite low, and we're trying to do a lot with a little. Simplify, I think, was something put in place to try and be the antidote to the issue that we have 2 founders that are designers, because they take a very strange path to get places. They're very thoughtful, they're very creative, and it can be chaotic. And so what we've tried to do is have a value about simplify to figure out how do we make sense of all of this chaos, particularly as fast as we've been growing. And then finally, embrace the adventure. When you're growing as fast as we are, when you are in a situation that's completely fluid, when you have to deal with ambiguity all of the time, you have to embrace the adventure, or you would either implode or you would go crazy. So those are our 6 values. Some interesting ways around how we use them. Every single employee who's hired, and this started when they hired their first employee, go through core values interviews. For the first 500 employees, it was Brian, Joe, or Nate that interviewed them. And now that we've grown further, they've hand-selected people in the company who are core values interviewers. And the way it works is we have technical functional interviews, as a typical company would have, done by the hiring manager or the team. But we also have 2 core values interviewers who are looking, does this person believe in the mission? Do they really want to figure out how we can make personal connections? Are they interested in figuring out how we can have people actually feeling like they travel and live there? And then would they further these 6 values? If both core values interviewers say yes, no problem. If one says yes and one says no, we bring in a tiebreaker. If they both say no, game over. There's no way this person's going to be hired. And this really applies to every job in the company, whether it's a dishwasher in our kitchen or whether it's a CFO. And we actually had to turn over a CFO candidate because they didn't pass the core values interviews. So it's definitely something that we look for, and it's something that we live every day. So the second topic I wanted to talk about, so the first one was mission and values, is this idea of how do we create employee experience through engagement of community connections. So this is a little bit of what's behind the curtain of how we operate. So for us, community connections are three things. One is, how do we create community with each other? So our employees are scattered around the world. We're in 21 countries. We have close to 3,000 employees, and they're in very different roles. You know, we've got everything from the folks in tech who do engineering and product management and design, all the way to customer experience, and then to dishwashers, marketers, HR, finance, etc. How do we create the connection between our employees, both across discipline and across the world? So we do a number of things. We try to encourage our employees to travel as part of their work. We have programs like Explorers, where we identify projects in certain countries or functions, and we encourage people from other functions to try that out and to spend 12 weeks in another role or in another country. We also very much focus on bringing our employees together, and I'll talk about that in a minute. We also encourage our employees to spend time with our hosts and our guests. So every employee gets $2,000 of travel vouchers every year. When they travel, we ask them to book with hosts and stay in their homes with them. We all travel with gifts for our hosts, and we try and spend time in their living room asking them what it's like to be a host and what can we do differently to help them. What I like to do when I travel, and I just did that today when I left Irina's place just down the street, was to leave an Airbnb keychain attached to the keys, and it's a little special treat for them. We also have our employees call the superhost when they get awarded that level, rather than just sending an email. We have our employees shadow our customer experience team. We just had a host open in LA last week, which is an incredible event capped by a concert with Maroon 5 and a special surprise of Lady Gaga. We had 8,000 hosts. We took 1,200 employees, because we feel it's so important for our employees and our hosts to be able to work together, understand each other, learn from each other. The last thing is we encourage our employees to spend time in the communities in which they operate. The founders and I introduced 4 hours of volunteering for every employee for every month. And we do that either individually or once a year we do that collectively in an idea called Week for Good. And we also try and do that through our hosts. So we find out in each city what are our hosts interested in, where are they giving back, and how do we encourage our employees to participate with our hosts to get to know the community and give back to the community. We also have, as part of our trips experiences, what we're calling social good trips. And those are trips that either get travelers to spend time with nonprofits or those less fortunate in a city, or the trip would give 100% of what we collect to a nonprofit to help the city in which they're traveling. So I talked to you a little bit about this. The employee experience team is much broader than human resources. We apply human-centered design, which is what is better defined as co-creating with our employees. So we don't do things to them. We ask them what's meaningful to them. And we involve them in how we design programs, how we design the office, etc. There is a special sauce at Airbnb that I'm not embarrassed to share with you. There's a small group called the ground control team. They started out in facilities and office management, and what they do is they help bring our culture to life. They're spread across the world, and they focus on internal communications, employee events, recognition and celebration. And right now they're back in San Francisco and around the world trying to help us plan for bringing all 3,000 employees together in San Francisco for a 3-day meetup, where employees will be staying with hosts, employees will be divided into troops and we'll have troop hosts, employees will be hosting other employees in their home for dinner parties, and we'll be learning about what's going on in 2017 and getting to know each other better. A special thing about Airbnb is our workplaces. We feel like we want to make sure we figure out how we create this idea of belonging in our workplace, and we also try to figure out how do we honor the hosts from around the world, and how do we also remind ourselves that we're part of a global travel company. So believe it or not, this is a call center in Portland, Oregon, and it looks very similar to our call center in Dublin, Ireland. Speaking of Dublin, Ireland, this is the front lobby of our call center. It looks like a pub, because after 5 o'clock it becomes a hub, a pub hub. And so our offices really resemble both the cities in which we live in and also homes from around the world. This is in Portland, where they designed this treehouse. And now I want to show you a video about some of how we've thought about reimagining the workplace.
This is the call center, both a model of efficiency and a denial of humanity, a place where no one belongs. Airbnb's commitment to a world where you can belong anywhere demands a highly specialized understanding of customer service, something that can only be done in-house. It was time to start taking calls, but we knew there was a better way. If Airbnb were to redefine the work environment the way we redefine travel, we had to enter design with no assumptions and many questions. What makes an office an effective and functional place to work every day? The data was rich, but this was the headline. People wanted to work in a variety of positions in a variety of ways. So we developed a new type of furniture, the standing landing, a standing height workspace where one can hang their jacket, store their laptop, and charge it overnight. This is how it works. The footprint of a traditional desk is subdivided, providing a compact, multi-use surface for the individual and giving the remaining area back to the collective. In this way,
Okay. Cut short, but you get the idea. Aaron, who you heard speaking, is actually on the environments team, which is part of the employee experience team. And essentially, what they did was spend a lot of time with our employees, understand in this kind of human-centered design aspect of how is it that people want to work, and then with the employees created this experience that you can see looks nothing like any other call center. And again, it takes this idea of belonging and travel and crashes it together in a really interesting work environment. This slide here is a little bit about the food program that we have. Food for us is actually a way of creating community as well. Some Silicon Valley companies use food as a way to bring people in early or keep them there late. For us, it's around creating connections. And as you can see on the left, the menu every day changes, and it's based on a listing from somewhere around the world. So you never know which country you're going to be eating with or from. And the team is all in-house, and they are thinking about not only culture, but they're also thinking about wellness. The food is all healthy, organic, locally sustainable. And we've also done away with packaging, bottles and cans, so it's all kind of sourced closest to where it's grown or where it comes from. The other ways in which we try to make sure we're creating connection and we're engaging our employees is through internal communications. It's very important for us, and particularly the millennial employees that we have, to feel like they have a voice and to also feel like they have the information that they need to do their job. It's kind of a mind of its own. This is Brian, and here we are at a weekly communications that we have. So on Thursdays, we have a World At. It's streamed live across the world, and essentially it's telling people what's going on in the company, things they should know, what's going on in the culture, what's going on in the communities, and what's going on with the evolution of the business. And at least 20 minutes each week is also open questions and answers with either Brian or the leadership team, because we want to make sure people feel like they can understand and be part of what we're doing. I talked about bringing people together. We've had the last 3 years an opportunity to bring all our employees together. The first time it was 650. The last time was 1,200. In January, it'll be 3,000. We also try to figure out how we help people to connect through technology. So we've created an intranet site that's a little bit like an internal Facebook that lets people talk about what they're interested in, what hobbies they have, what they want to teach other people, so that people can understand more about the people they work with. And then finally, I also talked about global citizenship and the importance of helping people feel like they can give back. The founders are big-hearted. If we're going to have people coming into communities. We want to make sure that they can understand everything about that community and give back to that community as well. So it all has worked out well for us so far, and that we have very significant numbers in our employee engagement. When I started 3 years ago, we had 650 employees, and now we have 3,000. And I'm happy to say when I started, our employee engagement index was about 69%. And within a year, with all of these efforts, we got it up to around 85%. And these are some of the numbers that have to do around the idea of belonging, around vision and mission, culture and core values, which I think is, again, what makes Airbnb so special, and why I believe that there's a lot of people around the world that are trying to help be part of this community. And that's my speech. Right on time, I guess.
Before Philip got on stage, how many of you want to send a CV to Mark from tomorrow? Many, as you see. So,
we'll welcome that. It's actually pretty interesting. Last year, we received 180,000 CVs for about 1,200 jobs. So to be honest, the idea of core values interviewing really helps us to take that filter and make sure people are wanting to work for us for the right reasons. Should we sit?
Welcome. Yeah, let's have a seat.
All right.
I have this, when you talk about disruptors and changing things, I also, being one myself, one of the biggest struggles I would have is when something that used to be disruptive becomes mainstream. And you know, years and years ago, I remember electric windows, I got a few years on you, in an automobile was an extra. It was very innovative, and you paid money for an electric window. And now there's no such thing as a manual window. So have you gotten to that point yet, where some things just 4-ish years ago that were so incredibly disruptive and innovative are now becoming a little mainstream, and you have a sense to re-engage?
Well, I feel like when I was starting with the company and I would go out and talk, a lot of people didn't know who you were. There's slides that I've taken out of the deck now that explained, here's how it works, and here's why it's something that's new and different and you should try it. I don't believe we're the new normal yet. I think it's more psychographic than demographic of who's traveling on Airbnb.
And if when you get to those points, do you think culturally Airbnb is prepared to deal with, we just made the new normal and now we have to come up with a new innovative?
Well, so I would say that our mission around creating a world where anyone can belong anywhere, it started with trying to be disruptive, but I think it would end with it being the new normal. Brian wanted to have the mission actually be create a world where anyone can belong anywhere and everyone lives as one. But it was a little too California woo-woo, I think.
Too woo-woo, yes.
And in this day and age with what's going on politically, I'm not sure it's going to be longer than I think we intended to get there. But I feel like the company, as Brian says, he started the company, they started the company as hosts. And that's where their heart is. And so it's not about making a profit. It's not about disrupting. It's much more around changing the way people are experiencing travel and the world.
Yeah. It's one thing to design and instill a special culture with now 3,000 employees. But how do you extend that to, 3 million properties and growing? It can't be that easy.
No. So the inside-out strategy I was talking about is definitely something that we've been leveraging to try and figure out how we create this bigger community. And so the Host Open, which started about 4 years ago in the offices and then evolved to about 1,500 in San Francisco and about 7,000 in Paris.
And when it was in Paris, it was right during or before
that was
terrorist event?
Just a brief aside. Yeah, we had 7,000 hosts and 650 employees in Paris. It was a 3-day event, and on the evening of the second day was when the terrorist attacks happened.
Right.
and it was horrendous in that it was the one night when everyone was out in the city.
Were you there?
I was there, and I was actually that evening at a special dinner that Brian, Joe, Nate, and I had planned for our longer-term employees. And we had all of those employees. We had Brian and Joe's parents, and we had a chef who was actually a precursor to our experiences, who had done some work to kind of help us beta test trips and experiences, all in this one home. And we were about to sit down for this amazing meal, and then I heard what was going on, and we couldn't leave. And we turned the bathroom actually into an action station, and he and I were both focused on how do we find all our employees and how do we make sure we communicate and get in touch with all the hosts to make sure they're okay. And it was a really abrupt and awful ending to the event. And the next day was actually a Saturday when we were going to have the 7,000 people off in Paris in experiences, kind of quietly beta testing what trips was going to look like.
They got an experience. It just wasn't exactly what was planned.
So this year at the Open, we actually started the event with the kickoff of trips, and then that afternoon, all of the folks that had come to Los Angeles signed up for an experience so that they could see what trips was all about.
Okay. But we were digressing. Sorry about that. You were talking about instilling a culture for 3,000 employees, but 3 million homeowners and growing is quite another.
Yeah. So what we've been doing is we kind of test things inside the company to see if they'll work outside of the company. So an example is we had 650 employees together for our first One Airbnb, our employee event. It worked out so well, that's when Chip said, we need to do this even bigger, to bring our hosts together, to bring them more closely. And some of the things we did at that event were we had employees host other employees out for dinner. And this was right before our brand launch, and we thought, let's not be Apple and keep everything quiet and then announce it to the world. Let's figure out how do we bring our hosts along with us. So between February and July, we had employees go back to their countries and invite hosts to their homes or out to restaurants and talk to them about this evolution towards belonging and the fact that we were looking at changing our mission and that we wanted them to be a part of that. And so we're continually looking at ways in which we can take what works inside and then create that community outside.
Philip, we have one question from the floor.
Can we turn the lights up, please? Yep, so you can see.
Okay. Hello. Thank you so much for your comments, and I think you should be congratulated because the culture you're building inside Airbnb sounds incredible. One of the things that I see is that Airbnb, to me, in Italy, feels like there's a very huge disconnect between your core values inside the company and the reality on the ground. In very highly desirable places in Italy, a lot of Airbnb hosts are renting apartments. It's a purely financial transaction, and it's a great business for who's in it, but it feels like it's completely different than the culture that you're trying to create. And it obviously is creating a lot of problems in densely populated areas where residents are being pushed out because they can't afford to live in their beautiful area.
So why don't you talk
Good
about two parts. The first part where she said it feels a little different than what you just said.
So we would all agree that we grew. So interesting. We were concerned we were going to lose our culture inside. And so we actually implemented this year a people and culture strategy called Growth by Design, where we actually purposefully constrained our headcount, even though the business was growing, to make sure that we were planful in how we grew our employees. We didn't do that with our homes. And so we now have 3 million homes around the world. And we'd be the first to admit that the quality of the homes and the hosts is not where it needs to be. So we're actually working internally to try and figure out how do we not just use the review process, but how do we really look at the ways that we can curate and improve the quality, because we're concerned of the brand image if what we're espousing isn't what people are seeing. So I acknowledge that is an issue. I will also say that a lot of people do start hosting on Airbnb for financial reasons, and they end up staying with us and kind of fall in love with the idea for emotional reasons, whether it's the connection they make with their guests, or whether it's a void in their life because their child moved out or their husband or wife passed away, or they just feel like they can travel without leaving their home. So the first part of your question, I would say, I understand, and we're definitely working on that, because we want everyone to have this feeling of belonging, and I've experienced it myself when I travel. It's why we created the Superhost, and it's why we now have host standards on the platform, and it's why we're doing more around holding hosts accountable and deactivating or taking them off the platform. Not to get into it, but we had a whole interesting situation a few months ago, or maybe it's only a month ago, where we actually asked all of our community to agree to and adapt to a commitment around creating belonging around the world. And we got lots of different viewpoints. Some thought it was amazing, and others told us to go to hell, to be honest with you. But we feel like we want our hosts and our guests to commit to this idea of belonging, and if they can't, then there's other ways that they could list their home. The second part of the question, remind me, because I just talked too long.
So it's the question you get all over the world, especially in San Francisco.
Yes.
Where people are renting places that normally
Right.
would be full-time residences, and the policy
Right.
issue is it really shrinking
Right.
the available rooms for people to live in?
So we have a social compact that Chris Lehane, as head of our public policy team, has implemented around the world. Our aspiration is that we work closely with communities on trying to figure out how to do this in a very respectful way and how to do this in a legal way. The laws are different in every city and every country, and the sentiment changes depending on who's in office or what's going on in a particular location. But our intent is, and particularly in densely populated places, we have commitments with cities where it's one host, one home. So an individual should either be renting a room in their home, or they should be renting their home when they're traveling. And that should solve that issue, because we are trying to figure out how people are sharing space when it's available.
So honestly, what percentage of the 3 million would you say right now, it's not where you want it to be, are not a room with the owner living in it, or the owner is out of town? What percentage is not those
I don't
two?
have the statistics, but what we're doing now is looking and finding ways to capture that information and to make sure we're addressing that situation.
Yeah, it's like in New York City, the guy gets the whole building and turns it into
In some cities where we've been working with the government, we've gone into the data, we've deactivated hosts with several properties. There are, on the opposite side of things, we're also working with landlords and property companies to figure out how to create Airbnb-friendly buildings, not to turn them into hotels, but to have it be legitimized and have an opportunity that if you move into that building, you know it's Airbnb-friendly, and you know that
How is that program?
well, it's
going?
just getting off the ground. There's a lot of people that are interested in that, because what we're also doing then is figuring out how the property owners can be part of the revenue share, and it's a way that all the neighbors in that building know that if I'm out of town or if I have an extra room, there might be someone who you don't know that's in the building, but we're all agreeing to the kind of terms and conditions of how we travel.
So you have enough challenges as it is extending this culture all over the world in a rapidly growing business. But now Airbnb is several weeks into its broader strategy where instead of about homes, it's about the broader spectrum of the travel experience. It's air, hotel, car, tours, activities, where it's going to take you. And so as you move, say, into transport, right, it's one thing to be a homeowner, but if you own an airline or a transfer company or something like that, you're going to come up with different types of people. How do you envision your mission as extending employee experience being challenged by Airbnb's broader strategy now?
So I guess I'll address trips and then I'll address the other verticals because we are looking at them as verticals. I'd say relative to trips, it's extending this idea of having people travel and feel like they live there.
Right.
And it's around giving locals an opportunity to show and be proud of the place that they live. And as the gentleman prior to us talked about, it's creating personal and more connection in travel rather than going to the same usual places and giving people much more of an appreciation for where they're going. I think that is pretty simple and straightforward. And whether our home hosts are also city hosts or experience hosts.
Yeah, so tours, activities, that's probably the easier part.
When it comes to the
Beyond
other
trips?
When it comes to the other verticals, we're really just starting to look at that. Our intent isn't to take those over. Our intent is how can you, rather than going to a search engine, come to Airbnb to figure out if you're interested in art or if you're interested in food or you're interested in outdoor exploration. How do you start by going to a place that helps you look at that rather than the place you're going?
Now you have Lufthansa strikes. Every year at ITB Berlin, the largest show in the world, travel show,
right.
Somebody always strikes. I was with my aging mother once in Paris. We landed at CDG, and the baggage handlers went on strike. And I actually turned to one and I said, could you just explain to my mother why this behavior is supposed to encourage us to want to come to Paris?
Right.
And of course, they dismissed the question,
Yeah.
and they got all into about their personal economics and how they're not paid enough. And all. So you're really going to be going up against some cultural challenges.
Yeah, our intent is to figure out where can we find partners, companies we work with, who have this interest in creating a seamless way to travel and a different kind of experience, a more customized, a more personal, a more thoughtful way to travel. And like I said, we're just starting to explore that.
So as you know, I know Chip Conley very well at Airbnb. You brought in a career hospitality professional, I think, to help hosts do a better job in hospitality, which a lot of people here are. So since Airbnb, Brian, Nate, and Joe, they're very visionary, what's the vision of a longer-term equilibrium, a relationship between hoteliers and Airbnb hosts? Because right now, that's not the most settled part of the travel industry.
Yeah, so let me see how to answer this without
stepping on toes. Here, you
stepping
can
on toes or talking out of school. It's very interesting. In the last 2 years, executives from almost every one of the large hotel companies have come to meet with our teams. Some have come having had zero experience on Airbnb, never gone to the website, never tried it. Others had tried it and were curious. And I think they're intrigued by what we're doing, and you can see a lot of the hotels companies now trying to figure out how do I cater to millennials? How do I find ways to create space that are more communal within my hotels? And there's been several conversations around what are the ways in which someday in a world, rather than getting your key to your room in a hotel, you could stop at the hotel and get the key to your apartment because your host isn't there at the time.
And we think Accor may be doing that with one fine stay. Would it just
probably they would. The other thing is there's a lot of small hotels, bed and breakfasts around the world, who it's hard to find them and it's hard to access them, who are creating belonging. And so there are thoughts around how could those people end up as part of the Airbnb family, and what's the way we do that without getting away from what it is we're trying to do in our mission?
I'm just curious. Let's ask. So, of the hoteliers in the room, could you clap if, as a hotelier, you're also providing services like check-in, check-out, laundry, concierge, let them use your facilities? to any Airbnb hosts? Clap if anyone's doing that. One or two. That's the part. I mean, if I were an independent hotelier, I would say, you know, I could do check-in and check-out really well. So is that an initiative to reach out to the hotel community, get them to more interact?
There's definitely ongoing conversations around how can we work better together. Yeah.
Maybe a final thought. If we had the opportunity to sit on this stage, same stage a year from now, what do you think one proud thing that will happen at Airbnb, it hasn't happened yet, but that you would be very proud to report on a year from now?
Oh, there's a lot of things we're working on.
But they're all not going to happen unless you're amazing.
Yeah.
Superman.
I'd say two of the bigger things that we're working on is the idea of how do we get rid of discrimination in the world, because it's kind of an enemy to belonging. So we're working through that through the commitment of our hosts and guests. And then the second would be how can we help better educate and work more closely with cities and governments around the world to better understand and figure out how this sharing economy can be more accepted.
I wish you great success with that. Ladies and gentlemen, Mark Levy, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great job.
Pleasure to be here.